Hello, Mayo. This is Grandma. Letter to you from Baratti, where Grandpa and I are staying for a couple of weeks here in September at Maria Teresa's house. Maybe you remember it. Grandpa had his 70th birthday here about 5 years ago. Mayo, this is my first letter to you since you left for New York. I'm longing to hear about your school. Do you know your Tia Pat? Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Your Tia Pat went to a Sacred Heart school in Philadelphia, here. That was in 1944. Work out how many years ago that was. I went to this Sacred Heart school here in England, called Woldingham. Why don't you ask the nuns if they have heard of Woldingham? Perhaps they've also heard of Mother Shanley, my headmistress. They might have heard of her when they went to Rome to take their vows at the Mother House in Rome. Talking about Rome, have you been following the Pope's visit to New York? Did you or any of the girls from your school watch as he progressed up Central Park? The London papers were full of pictures of this little girl from a school in Harlem who was due to meet the Pope when he came to visit the school. Did you see that on television? I hope you have a lot to tell me about Papa Francesco. Papa is the Italian for Pope, and it comes from the late Greek papas, and was a title for a bishop. Francesco is Bishop of Rome, and so, of course, was the first Bishop of Rome, St. Peter. I'm really looking forward, Bio, what you have to tell me about Papa Francesco. Good names, those, both of them. Papa is the Italian for Pope and comes from the late Greek and late Latin papas, meaning a bishop. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome. You can see here in this cavalcade how Papa Francesco is wearing the bishop's mitre, not the triple tiara of a pope. The first Bishop of Rome, as you know, was Peter, one of the 12 apostles chosen by Jesus Christ during his ministry in the land of Israel 20 centuries ago. Mayo, do you know the story of how and why a fisherman called Simon was given the nickname of Peter? Simon, the son of Jonas, was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, that same sea where the mice grandmothers told stories to their grandchildren. You remember? They told stories about a wonderful man called Jesus, who on these very shores had given a wonderful picnic with so much food that baskets and baskets had been filled after all the people and the mice had eaten. Well, those grandmothers would have told their stories in Aramaic, the spoken language of the land of Israel at the time of Jesus. And Jesus, too, would have told his stories in Aramaic. The Aramaic language originated in this region on the map outlined in red, today's Syria. It originated about 1,000 years before the time of Jesus. Aramaic was spoken from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, you see there where Antioch is, right across the whole of the Middle East and up to India. You see where the Indus River is marked. An Aramaic script was developed from the spoken language about 900 years before the time of Jesus. And this eventually developed into a script that looks something like this, from which both modern Hebrew script and Arabic script developed. You read these scripts from right to left. This is how they would have written the word rock in Aramaic. Had the mice and Jesus written down their stories, they might have used an old Aramaic script like this. Or they might have written down their stories in Greek. But they didn't write. And the stories Jesus told in Aramaic were only written down much later by his disciples. And they definitely wrote in Greek. So the story of how Simon was called Peter by Jesus was written down by the disciples of Jesus in Greek, some 50 years after the event. Now, in giving Simon the nickname Peter, Jesus was making a pun. And this pun works in Aramaic, it works in Greek, it even works in Latin. Look, Olympia. One of Jesus' disciples, John, wrote in his Gospel, chapter 1, verse 42, Isus aipen zu ai Simon, ho huios Ioannum, su klithisi Cephas. And he goes on to explain to his readers, who would read it in Greek, that Cephas in Aramaic means rock. Matthew, another one of Jesus' disciples, in his Gospel, chapter 16, verse 18, again writing in Greek, says, Su ai Petros, kai epi tautiti Petra, oikodomi ni zu. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build. About 400 years after the death of Christ, a pope decided that we really needed the Gospels in Latin, and he commissioned his secretary, Jerome, to collate all the Greek versions of these stories and translate them into Latin. And this is how he translated them. Et ego dico tibi, quia tu es Petrus, et super hanc Petram edificabo. Now, Olympia, you know, et ego dico tibi, you know, to you, quia, that, tu es Petrus, you are Peter, et super, upon hanc Petram, Petram, a rock. Now, the pun on Kephas, rock, or Petros, rock, or Petrus, rock, works in all three languages, but not in English. If only Jesus had spoken in English, we might have been able to have Simon, you'll be known as Rocky, and upon this rock I will build. Rocky the Rock. Now, why do you think Jesus thought a rock a good metaphor to suggest the qualities of the fisherman Simon? Olympia, go to read Matthew 16, chapter 16, and start at verse 15 and read on to verse 18, which we've already read. Then write and tell me what Jesus thought of Simon, Rocky, Peter. Especially concentrate on verse 15. Bye now, my love.